In this class, we'll be talking about William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. This is one of his most popular plays and has had many adaptations. Most famously, you might know Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes' version, which was highly popular among people your age. The first performance of this play was in the 1590s, so it's been going on for over 400 years, multiple people performing this play around the world. And actually, going back to the 1590s, we don't need to worry about that so much, because in this class, we're not going to talk so much about the historical context of the play, but just the play itself, as Shakespeare might say. You might already know the story of Romeo and Juliet, because it's what we call in literature a trope. A trope is a commonly held idea that most of us know when we look at a work of literature. For example, a flower is a trope because commonly we think that a flower is something that's beautiful. A beautiful young girl might be a flower. Or light might be a trope for knowledge. The play Romeo and Juliet is a trope about boy meets girl, star-crossed lovers. Boy sees girl and wants to fall in love with girl and has to go through all sorts of things to find her. This is a common trope that you've seen in movies and in plays like this. Now, when I said we're not going to go back to the historical time period is because we're going to take an approach of looking at the play that's called new criticism. New criticism came out of the early 1900s, and it was the idea that we want to look at the text itself and try to see what do we see within it, not outside of it, not in literary criticism, not even what your teacher really thinks about it, not the movies, not the adaptations, not the history, but just the play itself. We also don't care what Shakespeare thought about the play. That's not important to us anymore. This is called new criticism. We want to avoid what is called paratext, anything outside of the text. We want to look just inside of it. And this is useful for you. You don't have to go study the history. You don't need to go look up words. Just look at the play itself. And you can follow along with me, and I'll lead you through it in this new critical approach. However, to understand Shakespeare, we do need to know a few things. Primarily, we need to know the genre of the play. It is drama. Then we have to think, what is drama? What does that mean? How should I read this? We think about drama, most importantly, we think about it being performed on a stage. Actors, actresses. And we have to imagine in our minds, when we read the play, what's going on the stage? Where are people standing? What is their facial expression? Is there a bed, a knife? We need to know these things. So when you read the play, in your mind, you should be trying to picture it, to visualize it. What's happening on the stage? This is very different from a poem. It's very different from a novel, a short story even. People actually perform this on a stage. We have to think about that and keep it in mind. Second of all, we need to remember that a play is meant to be spoken. It's not really meant to be read at all. We read Shakespeare now and we study him, but no one did that in the past. They watched Shakespeare on the stage. They only read it so they could perform it. This is very important to keep in mind. And also, when you come across some of the lines in Shakespeare, you think, this is very difficult. I don't understand this. Remember, it's meant to be spoken. It's meant to be performed. Read the lines out loud. Think about where the pauses are, which words are important. This can help you understand some of the more difficult parts, because Shakespeare is quite difficult. And not only is he difficult, he's also very important. Most of us think that Shakespeare is the best writer in the history of Western literature. So studying him is wonderful for a student. But what I hope to do in this course is not just help you to understand this one play, Romeo and Juliet. That's not really important. What's important is, how do we approach any play? That's the goal of the class. How can I come to any play and start to think about how to read it, not just this one play? So at the end of the course, hopefully you understand Romeo and Juliet and even like it. But more importantly, you could read another play and enjoy it as well. Now, to get more into drama, because that's what I want to cover first, is drama. How do I read the play? Drama has three key aspects that we need to understand. The first of these is called stage directions. As you read the play, you'll notice moments where there's something that's not part of the play. It's telling you what to do, like enter the stage, pick up a knife, kiss the girl. These are stage directions. You'll also see an unfamiliar term, a Latin term, exunt. This means everyone exit the stage. Those stage directions are important because they help us visualize the play. Shakespeare actually doesn't use stage directions very often. He tells you who's on the stage, that's important, but he doesn't very often tell you what they do. This is great because we can imagine what they do. And when we imagine where they're standing, how they look, this can help us think about what it might mean. And that's really the goal of literature, is thinking about what does it mean for the world at large. The second key aspect that I want to go over is dialogue. Dialogue, the word die, and log means word, so two words, dialogue. This is two people speaking. A lot of Shakespeare is that, two people on the stage talking to each other. That's one type of dialogue, but there's more. There's also monologue. Mono means one, log means word. This is when one character speaks and no one else talks back to him. That's a monologue. You'll notice these in Shakespeare, and these are actually what we usually think of as key passages that we want to look at, where the most beautiful writing comes out. But there's an even more beautiful type of writing of a monologue sort, which is called soliloquy. A soliloquy is when one person speaks and other characters might not hear them. Only the audience hears them. And normally these are done in a verse form, like a poem, and they are the most beautiful parts of Shakespeare. We'll definitely look closely at the soliloquy scenes in the play. Another type of dialogue in Shakespeare that we'll see is called the aside. An aside is when there are two characters on the stage next to each other, and one of them might turn to the side like this and say, "He doesn't know." And the audience hears, but this character doesn't hear. This is really interesting because then the audience knows something that this character does not. And that's how we can create dramatic irony and tension, and also sometimes humor in a text. We'll see that in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, and in all of Shakespeare's plays, and other plays as well. The last type of dialogue for Shakespeare that we need to know, and this is not a common type, is called the chorus. This comes from the Greeks, actually, and when you first open Romeo and Juliet to read it, you'll see a chorus at the start. The purpose of the chorus is to tell the audience what's happening. They give context to the play. They'll tell you the setting. They'll tell you who the characters are. They'll kind of summarize the action. In a way, they represent the audience themselves. But they understand maybe better than we do. So the first thing you read when you open Romeo and Juliet is the chorus telling you what's happening, what's going on, to familiarize you with the reading and prepare you for the text. The third thing is probably the most important. It's called the DRAMATIS PERSONAE, or just called the cast of characters. Who's in the play? Of course, a play has to have characters, and unlike a novel where you read and you discover the characters as you go, a play tells you on the very first page everyone that's in the play and who they are. I highly recommend, if you want to understand any drama, to look closely at the cast of characters, see what their relationships with each other are. And as you read and you encounter a character, perhaps you can't remember who they are, flip back to the DRAMATIS PERSONAE and check. This will allow you to better understand as you read and not get lost in all of the characters. Romeo and Juliet actually has over 20 characters in the play. That's a lot to keep up with. So take a look at the DRAMATIS PERSONAE and familiarize yourself. And we'll talk about that in our next lesson, actually. So much for the three key aspects of the play. I want to move on to thinking about the genre again, so we can understand the two main types of drama. In fact, there are many types of drama. There's opera, where the big lady sings, oh, like that. There's also no theater in Japan, some of you might be familiar with. There's commedia dell'arte in Italy. But we want to concern ourselves with the two basic forms of drama, comedy and tragedy. Comedy, most of you know. It's funny. Tragedy, most of you know. It's not funny. It's very sad. But we want to go further than that. We want to understand, why is it funny? Or, for Romeo and Juliet, why is it sad? Or even better, why is it tragic? We talk about the form of comedy very simply. It's the opposite of tragedy. In a comedy, all comedies start out in total chaos, disorder. Something horrible is happening. But in the end, it's perfectly ordered and everyone is happy. In Shakespeare's comedies, everyone gets married. Everyone gets married. But in his tragedies, everything starts off pretty good. But in the end, everything is chaos. And they don't end with marriages. Normally they end with many people dying. Quite tragic. To look more closely at tragedy, though, we should turn to Aristotle. I don't know if you've heard of Aristotle before, but he is a very famous thinker and very important to Western literature and the study of it. A long time ago, this Greek thinker wrote a book called Poetics. We still use it today to understand tragedy, even though it's been over 2,000 years. Aristotle's Poetics, we've lost some of it. We don't have his writings on comedy necessarily. We have some of his ideas. But luckily, we have all of his thoughts, that he wrote down anyway, on tragedy. And he tells us some things about what makes for a good tragedy. And we still follow this today. And Shakespeare himself seems to follow it in Romeo and Juliet. The three aspects that I want to go through of tragedy are three difficult words that I want you to remember. But there's also two other pieces that I want you to remember as well. So we have 5 things that I want to remember about tragedy. First of all, let's compare it to comedy again. Aristotle says that in tragedy, there should be a sense of probability. In comedy, there's a sense of possibility. We have to look at these two words very closely. Probability means that it probably could happen. It's very believable. Possibility, it could happen, but it's not likely. Think about something funny, like someone walking along and bumping into a tree. That's possible, but how likely is that to happen? It's very unlikely. So when it happens, it's very funny. Probability, though, is that it would probably happen. So when we read through Romeo and Juliet, we should think, the things that happen to Romeo, the things that happen to Juliet, are they probable? Could they have happened? Does Shakespeare make it believable? And that adds to the tragic elements. The other thing we want to look for in there is the tragic character. The character can't just be sad. He has to have some quality about him that makes us feel that it is a tragic ending. Aristotle says that there are 3 aspects of a tragic character. The first one that he outlines is hubris. Hubris is normally translated as some sort of prideful tendency. When we look at the play, we want to think, is Romeo prideful? Does he have something about him that he has a big head? He's egotistical? And also, we think about what is pride. Pride can be when I put myself in a situation of great danger. That's also prideful in a way. I think that no matter what comes, I can deal with it. Does Romeo do this? Does he have hubris? The second point is hamartia. Hamartia is kind of similar to pride, but it's more general. We call it a tragic flaw. What is Romeo's tragic flaw? Does he have one? According to Aristotle, for him to be a tragic figure, he must have some sort of hamartia, a tragic flaw. As we read through the text, we should look at that. And not just for Romeo, for Juliet, for other characters, Tybalt, Mercutio. Are they tragic? Are they comic? The last point that Aristotle outlines for a tragedy is called anagnorisis. This is a really long, difficult word, but it's a cool concept. Anagnorisis is a point of discovery. So here you have your figure that might be tragic, and then something happens where he realizes that all the things that he did led to this point, and he realizes it, and that adds to the tragedy. I definitely believe that Romeo and Juliet has this point in the play. As we read through, we want to look for these points of discovery, points where the character seems to see how everything came to be. So, to recap a little bit about what we've talked about today. First of all, the main question was, what is drama itself? The main point I wanted you to remember is it's meant to be performed in front of a live audience. We have to imagine it in our minds and remember that it's meant to be spoken. We also, very important for us to remember that distinction between comedy and tragedy, but more importantly, the tragic elements. And as we read through the play, Do we see them or not? So what I'd like for you to do for next time is go ahead and take a look at the first act of Romeo and Juliet. Look closely at the dramatis personae, get a sense of who the characters are, the Capulets, one family, the Montagues, another family, and then start reading the first act, and next time we'll go into it and look at some of the devices he employs in that first act and get started on the play.